It's that time again. The annual conference of the American Society of Ag Consultants, otherwise known as ASAC, is going to be held in Fort Myers, Florida, this November 4th and 5th. Kurt Covington is one of 9 professionals who will address the conference. The other speakers who will cover a wide range of topics represent Florida Farm Bureau, Florida Citrus Commission, University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, National Ag Law Center, Risk Mitigators and Advisors, Tyler Associates, as well as the lead economist for dairy at CoBank, and myself, Chrissy Wozniak from North American Ag. The day and a half of presentations will be followed by ag tours on Tuesday afternoon at Echo Farms, one of my favorite places here in Fort Myers. Attendees will experience farming at its most creative, with unique demonstrations, plants, and techniques being used to help farmers and urban gardeners in developing countries. A second tour at Echo will showcase simple technologies that can improve food, water, and shelter for millions of people. A third tour of a hydroponic grower is also being planned. For more information and to register, visit www.agconsultants.org. That's www.agconsultants.org. See you there. Today's Ag Spotlight episode is sponsored by Energrow. Energrow's oilseed pressing system helps farmers crush their feed costs. The easy way to make fresh, homegrown, high-quality meal plus expeller pressed oil right on the farm. The fully automated Turnkey Crush Pro is easy to set up and run 24/7. To learn more, go to energrow.ca. Hi, and welcome to the North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. On June 9th of this year, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and Department of the Army announced their intent to revise the definition of waters of the United States. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with an expert on the matter, Senior Director of the American Farm Bureau Federation from Fairfax Station, Virginia, Don Parrish. Welcome, Don, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Christy. It is my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. I've been with the Farm Bureau a lot of years. I've got 33 years in with the Farm Bureau. Have spent most of that time really focused on the Clean Water Act and how that impacts farmers and ranchers. I consider farmers and ranchers, the first environmentalists. We care about our land, we care about our water. But, working with the agencies and Congress to kind of make sure that the Clean Water Act does what it's supposed to do, which is provide the nation clean water, but also the clarity that farmers need to be able to produce the food, fiber, and fuel that we all need. Right. That's kind of my job, is making sure that we were able to achieve that by working together.
Oh, that's great. And the American Farm Bureau maintained that the Obama-era 2015 Water of the United States rule represented massive regulatory overreach and that it violated landowners' private property rights. So first, can you tell me about the Navigable Waters Protection Rule that rolled out in 2020 by the Trump administration and the history kind of the ongoing debate?
So what we're debating, Christy, is not things that are truly recognizable.
Right.
We all can understand rivers and lakes. We also can understand things that flow and that are aquatic in nature. We're talking streams that flow 365 days a year, that have, kind of a volume and frequency of flow that we all recognize as being streams. Mm-hmm. Where we really differ, primarily with the Obama administration back in 2015, is their reach into areas where it is very difficult to distinguish where land begins and water starts. So think of things like ditches, or think of things like a landscape where water, when it rains heavily, water kind of congregates and flows. Right. Whereas without the rain, there's no water and it's land. Those are the kinds of issues and the kind of places that I want your listeners to really understand is what we're arguing about. We're not arguing about, quote, navigable waters. We believe navigable has a meaning, and the agency should give that word and that term in the regulation meaning, and not just try to regulate land use in a way that really puts government or maybe a lot of other citizens, between, land use and proper protection of the environment.
Right. Yeah. Because a ditch can have water for a quarter of the year. And is that water or is that land? And I know in the Trump ruling, it was clearly defined, as clear as possible, but there were still problems with it. What do you foresee the EPA writing into the regulations?
So one of the things that the Trump administration did, like you indicated, is that they were very specific. They wanted connections to downstream waters that were observable, things that you and I could walk up on the landscape and see. That was important because they didn't want the public, citizens, farmers, and ranchers to get into trouble over things that you and I could not see with our naked eye. That's kind of critical because the Clean Water Act carries some very stiff criminal and civil penalties. So it's important that if we've got to comply with the rules and the regulations, my mother and my father and my cousins and uncles, whether they're farming or not, they need to be able to kind of understand on the landscape where the federal government is going to regulate. And I think that's important. I think that, we don't expect people to obey speed limit signs without having speed limit signs up on the road.
Right.
So I think it's critical in the case of the Clean Water Act that the public be able to embrace and understand why we're regulating certain areas the way we do, because we all want clean water.
Yes. Yeah, that should be a given on both sides of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Zippy Duvall recently said clean water and clarity are paramount. And that's why farmers shouldn't need a team of lawyers and consultants to farm. So what is the impact on farmers?
Well, the impact is kind of broad and widespread, depending upon ultimately what meets that definition of waters of the United States. There's a lot of things that could that could impact farmers and ranchers. Everything from, how deeply they can plow, how often they can plow certain types of land. It could also impact how they utilize different cultural techniques, whether or not they can use nutrients or maybe control the weeds and the insects in those areas. All of that is critically important and to producing food, but it's also kind of critically important to know when you need to go to the federal government and ask permission or when you can do it without that. And the whole issue of, are we going to recognize these spots or these places as being protected under the Clean Water Act? I think we all understand that it's important that we be able to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. So now the previous ruling's in place until they get the new regulations in order. So how long do you think that'll take?
Well, that's a good question. One of the things that is very interesting, if we go back to the 2015 rule, that rule was never implemented nationwide. It was really kind of implemented in kind of a hopscotch or checkerboard type of approach. And the reason it was never implemented nationwide is that there were a lot of judges that had some serious problems with the way that rule was developed. The Trump administration rule, or the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, has gone into effect nationwide. And for the most part, every judge that looked at it, including some pretty, liberal judges, have said that rule is a reasonable interpretation of the statute. Right. It is not something that goes beyond what Congress intended. It is probably something that does incorporate the terms that Congress used. And when you look at the history of the Clean Water Act, you look at the kind of debate and discussions around it, the judges looked at it and says, we think this is reasonable. So it has gone into effect nationwide. We're hopeful that it's going to stay in place for quite some time, but this administration has given us every indication that they're going to repeal that rule.
Right. Yeah. And that brings me to my next point. Michael Regan heads up the EPA, and his previous role was the head of North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. But it said that he worked closely with farmers and ranches, and he did win support from agriculture groups when Biden tapped him for the new role. But the EPA didn't engage farmers and landowners before announcing these plans to repeal the rule. and in fact said that the agency determined that the current rule is leading to significant environmental degradation. What are your comments about that?
Well, I have two comments, and the first one is I do think Michael Regan did a really nice job doing a lot of outreach to farm organizations. He spent a good bit of time talking to our president, President Duvall, and clearly President Duvall made the determination that he was the kind of person that would at least listen to farmers and ranchers. I think that was a problem back during the Obama administration because they considered a lot of our concerns silly or not very credible. So it really put a bad taste in farmers' mouth about wanting to do outreach and to make those kinds of conversations. So that was a good thing that he was so open and pledged to us that he would be transparent in whatever he did here. But what he did back in June was something that we consider a little one-sided. He listened to the other side. They were basically saying that there's problems. And he talked about the 333 projects that had been determined not to be jurisdictional now, but was jurisdictional prior to the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. And you know what? We've spent a good bit of time looking at those individually. And I can tell you that we've had individuals from Farm Bureau with boots on the ground go out and take a look at a number of those projects. And what concerns us is that they're talking about those projects being kind of anti-environmental. There's a number of those projects where they were actually enhancing or redeveloping wetlands. So you would have needed a permit prior to the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, but after the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, it made it easier to restore these wetlands. That was an example.
I see.
Other examples were things like conservation practices, grass waterways, where farmers put these grass waterways into their fields to reduce soil erosion and slow water coming off of the field down. There were numbers of those projects that were prior to the Navigable Waters Protection Rule deemed to be jurisdictional, but after the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, they weren't. So, the whole issue of whether or not these projects are causing environmental harm kind of goes out the window because these best management practices were put in place to improve the environment. We saw it in the case of farm ponds, particularly in the case of farm ponds where farmers were trying to store water so that their animals would have, water, or where they were trying to store water for irrigation purposes. Things that what we would consider not only good for the farm and good for their animals and good for our irrigation, but also good for the environment. Right. So that we were kind of using and recycling that water. Mm-hmm. So we've looked at those and we've kind of scratched our head to say, really, the primary reason that this administration has given for trying to repeal that Navigable Waters Protection Rule is the harm that is happening to the environment. And the projects that they've presented us as examples of why that is the case seems to be just the opposite, or at least a good number of them. And I'm scratching my head to say, if we dig into this a little closer, what's really going on here? Is it really about trying to stop projects? Because there were projects in here like, solar farms and solar farm energy storage facilities. There were a whole lot of these things that were, we think, pretty balanced in terms of how we protect the environment, but yet do good things for society.
Yeah, it seems like there are so many opinions, right? The Vermont Law School professor, Patrick Parenteau, he told Politico last month that it's hallucinogenic to think that any sort of agreement could be reached among the long warring parties. That's really sad. So what do you think of that? Is that true, do you think?
Here's what I know. Farmers and ranchers care about the environment. They care about water quality. But they also are going to draw the line by, when an administration tries to use the Clean Water Act as a surrogate for federal land use. They're also going to draw the line on any regulations that try to write the term navigable out of the Clean Water Act. Yeah. Those are important terms. And those are the terms that Congress used. They were the terms that was ultimately enacted into the statute. So, farmers and ranchers want it balanced. They don't want to, give up a property right or to put something into place that is going to create, water quality issues. But they want a balanced approach. They want one that is protective of the environment, but yet provides the clarity that they need to be able to farm.
Yeah. I always find that divide is so interesting because everyone has to eat, right? So why is this the farmer's problem? This is all of our problem, right?
It really is. And to be perfectly honest, I think all of us appreciate and understand that that we need to protect the environment, but we also need our laws to be clear and so that we can comply with them. And we want to do that in a way that is balanced. If you tip the scales too far in one way or the other, I can understand that we have a bad result from a federal policy. But we want to try to put a policy in place that does provide that balance and that gives the public what they need, which is clean water, clear rules.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything that we, the people involved in ag and farming, is there anything we can do to help the situation?
That is really important, Christy. I think most farmers and for sure most of the public need to kind of understand the details of this issue. Anybody can kind of get tripped up over the mountains and volumes of minutia when it comes to federal regulations and, what is being proposed out there. But I think your listeners need to really kind of pay attention to what's going on here. And they need to kind of ground truth, not only what farmers and ranchers are saying, and they should do that, but they should also ground truth what the government is saying and what environmentalists are saying. Mm-hmm. And is there, does it really pan out? And are people being truthful, and are they using their credibility in a way to put a policy in place that's good for the country? And I would encourage your people to really focus in on that. To me, the Clean Water Act is pretty clear. We want to protect water, but if we're pushing the statute beyond the pale, if we're pushing it to the point where we are regulating land as opposed to water, then I think we've gone too far as a nation, and I think the government needs to, kind of take a step back.
Absolutely. And where can people get more information?
We would love to provide that information. The American Farm Bureau website is a great resource, and we would be more than happy to have that information made available. So, we also have a number of state farm bureaus. Please go out and, those issues are probably going to be front and center on all of those state farm bureau websites. Yeah. So whatever we can do to be helpful, whether it's, those websites are going to AFBF and getting, directly in touch with me, they're welcome to do that. My email is donp@fb.org, and I'd be happy to respond to people.
Awesome. That's great. And so I have one last question for you. Why do you do what you do? What is your passion here?
My passion here is trying to help farmers achieve their goals and objectives. And their goals and objectives, believe it or not, is really about having a lifestyle that protects the environment, that makes their farm better for their next generation, but yet being able to produce food in a way that is affordable to the consumer and profitable to the farmer. So to me, I think it's making sure that all of that can take place. Farmers can be profitable, they can stay on the land, they can bring the next generation into the farm, and consumers, when they go to the grocery store, or if they have a direct relationship with the farmer, can go get the products they need in order to feed their families and be happy with what they have, whether that's beef, pork, chicken, or lettuce and tomatoes and you name it. Whatever we put on our tables, our members want to be able to produce that, and they want to produce it in quantities and at a price that consumers need and are willing to pay for.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, right? For sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Don. This is a huge issue, and I really appreciate your analysis.
Well, thank you. It is a critical issue. I think it is clearly an issue that most farmers and ranchers truly appreciate. Mm-hmm. It is one that they understand that the government needs to get this right. And if we get it right, we can have it all. And, it's a win-win. It's a win-win for the resource. It's a win-win for farmers. So when we don't get it right, people put their thumb on the scale and the regulation goes awry. And we need to get this one right.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks again. And thanks to everyone who's watching or listening. If you want more information, we'll provide the links in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to North American Ag Spotlight on our YouTube and Rumble channels. And the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Amazon, and wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks and have a great day.
Thank you, Chrissy.
Thanks so much for listening to today's Ag Spotlight episode, where we put the spotlight on people and companies doing great things for the agricultural industry. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, or on your favorite podcasting platform, and give us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on YouTube and Rumble to see the video version of Ag Spotlight. Also, head on over to NorthAmericanAg.com to subscribe to our Industry Connect update newsletter. If you're interested in advertising opportunities, email us at connect@NorthAmericanAg.com. Thanks for listening.